Hello, Tony here again. Well, something a little different this week. We're going to do a short tutorial on panel scripting. Specifically, just looking at the basics of how to create a panel and how to apply a script to a panel to maybe manipulate some instruments that are already on there. Now, it's important to say that with panel scripting, you can use most of the API functions that you can use in a normal instrument. So we're not going to go into those. We've already covered those in the video tutorial series. Which you can find in the playlists section of my channel. So go look at that if you don't understand how the basic API functions work in the instrument tutorial. But if you've kind of mastered the instrument API basics and you want to explore panel scripting a little bit more, then this video is probably for you. This will enable you to manipulate those instruments that you've created with those basic API functions at instrument level, and will enable you a little bit more control over the instruments in terms of whether they show or they hide, or you move them around on the screen, or you can alter the Z order. We might have a little play with that if we've got time. So yeah, we're not going to get into all those instrument functions. We're just going to concentrate mainly on the API functions that are particular to the panel scripting. So one of the benefits of panel scripting is that you can apply a script over the top of the instrument. So it will apply to say the UUID of one instrument or another instrument. It might say I want to see this one instead of this one. So that's the benefits. Maybe if you've got a smaller monitor and you've got limited space, or there's so much that you want to fit on and you can't fit it all on. Maybe some of you have seen some of my videos where I use pop-up instruments. Some of that is within the instrument itself. In fact, most of it is. But also there's another panel that I've yet to show for the Robin DR400, which I'll be showing shortly, that uses extensively panel scripting to create two different versions of the same panel, but for two different simulators. So there's an X-Plane version and a Microsoft Flight Simulator version, and the instruments are laid out slightly different on the two different panels in the two different sims. So I use panel scripting to shift the instruments about depending on which sim is loaded. So there's some kind of a real usage application that you might use panel scripting for, but we're going to keep it very basic, and we're going to just probably add a few instruments and then just maybe show and hide them and just give you an example of how you would do that within panel scripting. But first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to create a panel. I've seen some people asking some questions about how you even create a panel, which is quite basic stuff in Air Manager, so we're not particularly going to dwell on that too much, but the very first part of this will show how to create the basic panel, and then how to port that panel over into your Create Edit tab, which again I've done a video on in the past, but I shall re-go over that very quickly in this video too, because it's important that you get it into Create Edit first, and then you can manipulate it with panel scripting. So let's get into it. So I've got my Air Manager window open here with nothing in it. This is a bare virgin install of Air Manager. So what we're going to do is the very first task we're going to do, you see in this Home tab here, we're going to create a panel. So what we're going to do very simply is just click on this panel button up the top here and just select blank panel. You can see there's all these panels that you can add and choose if you want to, but probably maybe it would be beneficial if we chose one of these. What's that's got about half a dozen instruments there, isn't it? No, actually I think what we'll do is we'll just create a blank one. It might take a little bit more time, but that's what we'll do. We'll create a blank panel, and then sometimes on these other panels you can see you've got a choice of different layout options. This one's only got one, so we just click, I want that to display on, I know that this monitor is display 2, so I'm going to click add. Okay, so it's just created as you saw in the preview image, a black background layout, and if I were to run that on this monitor and just click show now, all you would get is that exact black screen, because we've not added the instrument yet. So we can change that black to be another color to represent the back of our panel, or we can leave it black, or we can make it transparent and put our own layout on. There's lots of complications for that. We're not going to go into that too much detail. Close that panel there. So you can see now it's appeared on the left hand side here, and it's just called default. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. It says default here, and I'm just going to rename this my panel. You can see that's renamed in the corner there. You can call that whatever you want, Cessna 172 or whatever aircraft it's for. And then further down there's some other settings for what display it's going to be on, what the input mode's going to be. I've got a touch screen, so you might want it touch only, you might only want mouse, or we can select mouse and touch. Then you got these settings to lock it in place or to always keep the panel on top of all the other windows that may open on your machine. And then this other option called click through, which enables us to click through the Air Manager panel through to any items that are sitting underneath it on the desktop. And that's when we use things like the GTN 750 that are touch enabled, that sit under an Air Manager panel and look like they're part of the panel. But we won't get into that in too much detail. We'll just leave those settings as they are. And then of course we've got Knobster. I've got a Knobster here, so I'm going to enable that just in case we want the Knobster. And this is down the bottom is where we change whether or not we want to lay out a solid color, transparency, or we want to create a custom image. So again, some people are not sure about how to do this. There's your transparent option, or if you don't want the transparent option, what I do is I create a custom image layout, and then I'll create a layout when we get into the Create Edit tab. Again, that's not something we're going to go into in too much detail, but that is something to be aware of that I can maybe do another video for, because that's a little bit more involved. So I'm going to choose another color here, just a little bit lighter on the background color. And you can see now when I scroll up to the top, our background color is now indeed that choice that I made, and we can just choose whatever we want there. So we'll go ahead, now we're in panel, is just going to choose some instruments for that panel. So I'm going to click on instrument here, and then the instrument add instrument window will appear, and you'll see there's a massive, great big long list of instruments. But you can use a search to shorten what you want, or if you're looking for a particular aircraft, you can find it down the side here and select maybe Cessna 182. There we go, or Cessna 172, or we were looking at the 152 earlier. So let's just choose the 172 for now, because that's obviously one that most people are familiar with. And we're going to add some instruments from that. So you can add them individually, or you can add them by clicking that one and then using your control to select the next one. Or you can, I think you can use shift actually, yeah. So shift will give you, just like it normally does when you're selecting things, everything between the two shift clicks, it will select everything, but we don't want everything, so we'll select one, then we'll use control to individually click so you can miss them out, you see. I'm going to add a 6-pack here. So what we've got, airspeed there, attitude, altimeter, where's our heading? It's there. I'm going to add that one as well, and by holding control here, there's my turn coordinator, and then I need a VSI, and there's a VSI. Now I think what we'll also do is we'll add, let's say we've got room for a couple more. Let's say we've got a couple of VORs there, and we've got a tacho as well. Got another large one, or is that basically it? That's it. Okay, well maybe what we'll do is we'll just have the tacho, and we'll have one of the VORs. About that. And we'll just click add, and it's going to add them all in the same spot up in this top left hand corner of our panel, as you can see there, and it's downloading those now. So when it's got them, they'll start adding them in, and they're all on top of one another. So what we can do is we just drag them out from it. So the VSI will go down here somewhere, VOR indicator will go there, turn coordinator will be over here. These are all a bit on the large side, aren't they? Altimeter, airspeed, right, so that's the last one. Now, obviously I can drag and resize these if I want to, but I can also expand out the panel on the left here, and I can see for each individual one I can go into minute detail of how many pixels I want each one to be. So let's say for instance we want to make that airspeed 400. You can see, because I've got preserve aspect ratio, which is ticked by default, I change one and the other one will change to preserve the aspect ratio, so they're all at 400. So I can just change that one to 400, that one to 400. You get more of a precise thing if you manipulate the actual numbers, whereas when you're dragging, it's very difficult to always tell exactly how big you're going to make it. You can always be a couple of 3 or 2 pixels or so out in size. Okay, so now we've got them all at about the same size. So let's just create our 6-pack. And let's say that we had something else up here, just for argument's sake. And we've only got room for the RPM gauge here, and something else is here, or that's all we've got. We've got another gauge there, let's just say. And we want this VOR gauge to also be on the panel, but what we're going to do is we're going to say, oh, a panel script, we're going to use a bit of panel script, and we're going to co-locate it with the RPM. Now, you'll see that it's gone over the top, and that's because it is after the tacho. So the tacho is higher up in the list, so it will be lower down. So this one will be the lowest. Think of this as a Z order. We refer to this as the Z order, or Z order, as some people may say, for when we get to panel scripting, because that is something that's important. So the first item in the list here with the panel scripting will be the lowest, and the one at the very bottom here will be the highest. So for the purposes of this, let's get them in order. So we've got airspeed. Where's attitude? So I can use control here and then just push my up and down arrows to move these items around within the list. So I've got attitude, indicator, altimeter, and then I want my turn coordinator to be next. Just going along in 2 rows, and then my heading and my VS. Yep. And then the last 2 that we want to play around with are the RPM, and so you can see the VOR is at the bottom now, but if I change it to be 1 above that, you can see now the RPM is, because the VOR is underneath it. So we're going to leave the RPM on top. Or are we? No, well, I think what we'll do is we'll leave the VOR on top. Right? But our default panel view will be the RPM, let's say. And then we're going to toggle a button or a switch to turn the VOR on. But we're going to co-locate them on the panel like that when we're going to create our panel. So we've got a very basic panel. I know it's very basic, and I know there's got no frills, but you can add all the frills at this point if you want to, and there's your basic panel created there. But if you go to create edit now, you can see in create edit, all those instruments that I required for that panel that it automatically downloaded when I created them have been added into my create edit list. So there's our list of instruments. If you go to panel now, you'll see there's no panels there at all, because it doesn't automatically create a panel when you create a panel here. But there's a way of getting it in there, and that's what I'm about to show you now. So there's my panel. We'll go back into create edit, and you see from the drop down list there's your list of instruments. You need to go to panel there, and obviously you've got the filter there if you had a big list of panels, but I've got quite a lot of panels, but even I'm not filling that up completely, so you probably don't need to use that too much. So what we're going to do is now create a panel. So the way we create a panel is we say new, just like we do with instruments, and then we get a panel information window come up, and there's 3 steps or 3 tiers to this panel creation thing that you have to do within create edit. But don't worry about what we've just done graphically. It's easier, I find it's easier to do the graphical part over in the panels tab and then not worry about it too much. You can create the panel entirely from here, but you have to know all the coordinates of all the instruments, where they're going to go, and sometimes you don't even know how it's going to lay out until you've dragged them and resized them and seen what they like. So it's better to have the graphical user interface for that, and then just import that over to here, which you're able to do. So we're going to do that. So we're just going to enter a name here very quickly. I'll call that my panel. Doesn't have to be the same name, it can be whatever you want it to be. Put my name in there. Say it's going to be version 1.00. What's the aircraft? Oh, it's a prop. It's a steam gauge cockpit, and there's 1 engine. just going to write any old thing in here. You can write what you want in there. Okay, so that's the basis of the first level. That's the holder to create the whole panel. So if you had a series of panels for different things, that's your top level folder if you want to look at it like that. All we need to do then is we just well, we can click on aircraft model and that would create us the next level down, or I can just right click on this here and it says add aircraft model. That's exactly the same as me clicking on that aircraft model at the top there. Now you can see there's put a little aircraft icon there, and we're going to click down on that level now, and you can see there's some more fields here to complete. So the make, enter the aircraft make. So let's say it's a Cessna. Let's say it's a 172. And we're going to say it's a generic aircraft. It's not an add-on from a specific developer. If you didn't tick generic, you can see, then you get the ability to fill these fields out if you want to. But no, we're going to say it's generic, and for the purposes of this, we're going to say it's compatible with X-Plane. But it could be FS 2020, FSX prepared, etc. Okay, so that's the second level. Then, from that level, you can see now the panel button that was grayed out until we created this aircraft level is now possible. So now we've created this Cessna 172 aircraft, we can create individual panels for it. So I can click that button, or again I can right click on there and say add a layout. Now add a layout is exactly the same as me clicking panel, and all that will do is create a blank panel, which you can do, and you can add all the instruments. Then the next one along here, you'll see instrument is grayed out currently, and that will become ungrayed out once we've created a panel, and then you can add instruments individually, but you don't get a graphical depiction of what that panel is going to look like. So you have to know the coordinates and the sizes of all the instruments ahead of time. If you've maybe planned it out that way, then you could do it this way, but I find it quite laborious and time consuming, and you don't get a look and feel of what the panel is going to look like until it's completed and you've run it, or you keep stopping it and running it and having a look, and it's just easier to do it in the other panel tool. And this is why, because you can literally just right click on there and do add a layout from, and you see when you get an add a layout from, you now see that there's one created called my panel, which basically it's picking up all the ones that we created in the home tab and showing you which ones are available. Now if you had a big list in there, you'd see a big list here. We've only created one, so there's only one there. So I'm going to say an add a layout from my panel, and when I click that, it adds it in there, my panel, and there's a little arrow here will drop down, and you can see there's all the instruments that we added in the other home tab, and they're in the order that we had them in that home tab. That's the other important thing. You can't change the order in this tab. What this does is it relies on you having to use panel scripting to change the order. I'd suggest you probably don't need to do that and go to all the trouble of writing code just to get the instruments in the right order. That's only really applicable if you have instruments that are overlapping. But if you plan your panel right, it doesn't really matter what the Z order of them are, because none of them are overlapping, so they're all maybe sitting on different levels, but they all look like they're on the same panel level, if that makes any sense. So there's our instruments, and you can see any of those instruments that have user properties you can access and set what these user properties are, and then you can recall this panel at a later date if you save it. And this is where the CIF file, so the .siff file comes in. You can, once you've created a panel here, just like with an instrument, you can use the import and export commands to back up your panels so that there's no risk of you losing them or corrupting them, or if Air Manager gets updated and you want to import them into someone else, or you want to share your panel with a friend, you can just send the CIF file, or you want to share it, you're having a problem and you want someone to look at your instrument or your panel on the forum, you can just upload a CIF file, and it's easy for people then just to import them into Air Manager and have a look at what you've done and give you some help. So CIF files, yeah, great thing. So onto our panel scripting now. We're just about done now. We've created a panel. We could add more in there if we'd created more in the other side, but we've only created that one basic one. So we're going to click OK now, and you can see we have got our panel here now, and if we were to click info, that gets us that window open again. So if we want to edit that, or we want to add, I could, if I wanted to add, now I click on that panel, I could add an additional instrument. If I click on that, that brings up that instrument add window again. I can add additional instruments if I wanted to. But again, like I said earlier, it's easier just to go back to your home tab, make your edits here. And once you've made your edits, come back here to create edit, go into the panel info thing, drop down to your panel, get rid of it, and then right click and add layout again. And whatever changes you've made over in the home tab, if you've added an instrument or taken an instrument away or repositioned it, those changes will come into here. You can see sizes, the left and top for each individual instrument as you've set them over in the home tab are all imported here just with that one right click and whoops, on the level above, add a layout from. So that's really powerful. So now we've got our layout. If we were to run it from the Create Edit tab, you can run a whole panel from Create Edit tab. And again, if you had more there, you'd see as we progress out, so that's the top level. And you saying run, that's the Cessna 172. Again, you could create multiple ones of them if you wanted to, but it tends to only be one aircraft. And then my panel, and again, you could have multiple ones of those. So we're gonna, sorry, I right clicked there to get that run menu up. And then my panel, we're gonna run it. And it's run on the other monitor, so I'll drag it down here. And you can see there's our panel, just like we would do as if we were running a single instrument in Create Edit. You can run a whole panel in Create Edit. Not that that's the way that you would run panels normally. This is more for creating the panels and for troubleshooting and whatnot. But just, it's there if you need to run them, just like you can run. And whichever was the last one run, if there was multiple ones, it would always remember the last one as run. You don't have to keep doing that right click out there every time. You don't even have to do it the first time. If there's only one and you click run, it will just run it from that normal run button like you do in Create Edit. And if it's small enough, you can press the stop button, or if it's on another monitor, the stop button will be possible. But as I'm just showing it on one monitor here, I haven't got access to that, so I'm just right clicking and stopping the panel. So that's the panel in Create Edit. So that's an important step. Now we've got that my panel in Create Edit. Now we're going to apply some scripting. Now you can see we're in Create Edit, just like, let's go back to the instrument. When you go to the instrument there, you see all the script in the editor here. I haven't got my editor set up the way I like it here. Text is very small and not formatted because I've got this fresh install. But never mind. So we'll go back to panel. So you can see now for this panel, the instrument scripting is blank, but we can create rows, and we can type our instrument scripts in here. So this is where our instrument scripts go. So that's the start of it. So let's have a quick look at the API page for instrument logic when we're here. So this is the Air Manager wiki for the API. And we're going to go and look for the panel scripting tools, which I think are under instrument, aren't they? There they are, instrument. It's not that intuitive, the name, but it's because you're manipulating instruments, but it's at the panel level. So it says here, these functions can only be used within a panel script, not within an instrument script. That doesn't mean that the instruments API functions can't be used on a panel script, because they can. I've not tried every last one of them, but I know all the ones I have used have worked, and there's no reason to think that any of them wouldn't work. You can still add images and create add switches and buttons and whatnot if you want to at panel level, but there's not really much need for that unless it was some common function that you wanted to have on your panel that didn't really apply specifically to an instrument, but it was more like, you know, setting a view or pushing a button to pause the simulator, something of that order. You could of course do that in an instrument. So here on the API page, there's a couple of these groups of functions that we're going to have a quick look at. And we're not going to look at the Z or Z order one too much, although we might have a little play with that if we've got time. But the one we're going to concentrate on there is getting the instrument ID and then using the node manipulators like move, visible, opacity, or viewport rect if you wanted to play around with them. So we'll probably just use a basic one like move or visible and show how it's possible to move those two instruments that we overlaid on top of one another at the moment. But what we're going to use the panel scripting for is to turn one off and turn the other one on so that you can flick between the two if you want to, if you've got, say, limited screen real estate. So let's get into this instrument get quickly. So the instrument get needs to get the UUID, as it explains here, the UUID string for the instrument. Now the UUID string, I'll show you how to get that in a minute very easily. And then it takes that UUID and then it uses that as the ID, a bit like you would create an ID for an image, and then you can manipulate it. Like you can turn it on and off, you can apply opacity to it, etc., etc. So we're going to steal that script, seeing as it's there. A good way of doing it, and it saves typing. The other way, of course, you can do it, I'm not sure if they're there, is you can use this, I right clicked again there, and you can use code snippets. So you go into code snippets and you can see there's all the subscribe and the command things for all the different sims. In the subsection of graphics, there's all the image and buttons and switches and maps and canvas and groups, user properties, hardware, helpers. So what we've got here, oh, instrument properties, is that? No, that's not. Not sure if the panel scripting ones are in there. Oh, other, are they? Nav, sound persistence, static. No. Shut down if. Whoops. And subscribe. Panel property. Don't think that's it either. No. So no, it doesn't look like they're in there. But I mean, that's a good shortcut for the instrument ones as well. If you need code snippets for certain things, like for instance, how to add an image. I think most of us know how to do that. But if you wanted a basic snippet of what the syntax is for the instruction, there it is, just with that quick snow code, and you can modify that. Then put the name of your PG in, play around with the X and Y and the width and the height, etc. We'll have to get the panel script one added in there. Okay, so let's get our instrument ID. So for the moment, what we'll do is, this is the one that we copied from the wiki, so we'll get rid of that and we'll just leave it like that for the moment. And what this is doing, it's saying is if the ID doesn't exist, so in other words, if it's nil, and if it can't get the instrument, sorry, if it's not nil, so in other words, make sure it does exist, then you do this visible, make it invisible. Else print could not find the instrument, right? So we're not going to worry about that too much. We'll get rid of that. But we'll keep that because that's a good little error check. And we'll say we'll go open our info window again, and we'll say we'll find the two instruments that we want. So the ones that we want were the tacho. We right click and we say copy the UUID to the clipboard. So the UUID, for those that don't know, let's just go back to instrument quickly. Yes, I do. The RPM was the one. So the UUID, when you go into the folder, you'll see, sorry, it opened on another monitor. So when you open the folder, you can see there's the resources file, that there's your logic.lua and your preview images. You can see the file structure just above that. Open directory, instruments, and there's the long UUID. So if you go to the open directory folder, you can see there's all the UUID folders with all of the subsets within them. You can click into any one of those and you get the resources folder and the preview. So that long number is the unique identifier. So we go back into panel scripting. And I think we grabbed it, but let's just make sure we grab it again. So the RPM gauge, that's the UUID we want. And we're going to paste that in there. And we're going to call this anything we want. RPM ID. And then underneath that, we're going to create another one. And that was for the CDI. I'm going to call that CDI ID. But what we need is, of course, we need the UUID of the VOR. Nav1 ILS CDI instrument. And we're going to paste that in there. So now we've got the two UUIDs and we've called them each by their names, so they've got some meaningful names. So now it's just a simple case of us saying maybe, no, I think what we'll do is we'll do no, actually I think I will. I'm going to create an invisible button, so I'm not going to create any images for the button. Now, bearing in mind this is a panel, so we're talking about when we apply any X, Y, width and height, we're talking about of the panel now. So you've got a big, in this case, 1920 by 1080 panel, so if you've got an invisible button, it has to be a button. It may not be an invisible button, you may have a graphic with it. It may even be a bit hardware. You might have a hardware switch that you want to control this with. You can do that too. But I'm not going to go into that today, but it's fairly easy to do, yeah, or you can even probably use the same callback for the hardware switch as you can for a soft switch if you're going to use that. But we're going to create a soft button, and within that soft button, I'm going to say, I'm going to put it, let's say I'm going to put it at 0, 0, and I'm going to make it 100 in size. So I'm going to make it quite big, and I'm going to put it in the top left hand corner, that's 0, 0. And then I'm going to put in an inline function here for quickness. So the function is just my callback. And so then within the callback, I'm going to want to change the visibility, which we've already got there. Just copied that, shouldn't I? No, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little variable. I'll explain what I'm doing here in a minute. Top of here, we're going to call that okay. So create a variable called showHide, for want of a better term, and we're going to use that showHide. And in here, every time we push the button, the showHide variable is going to toggle. So we're going to say showHide equals not showHide. So in other words, just invert it. So if it's false, make it true. If it's true, make it false. Simple as that. And then in here, we're going to say we're going to use two visibles. We've got one for the RPM and one for the CDI. Oops, two ID names on there. And then in the criteria for the showing of the hiding, I'm going to say, and we might have to toggle these in a minute, depending on which way around they are. I could probably work it out, but so initially when the panel starts, it's going to be false. Okay, so the one that we want to be showing, we said was the RPM. So in fact, it's that one that we want to be not. Okay, so not false. Or sorry, not true. In other words, false. This bit here after in the visible just has to equate to true. So if it equates to true, it will get shown. If it equates to false, then it will not get shown. So to make it visible, this has to be true. So show height, in the case when we first start the panel, the CDI The show hide has to be true. So show hide isn't, it's false when we first start the panel. So the CDI will be hidden, and because we've inverted the show hide, the RPM will be the opposite of hidden, which will be shown. And then they'll just keep swapping. Yeah, okay. So one will be shown and the other one will be hidden, but they can never both be shown at the same time. This is one way of doing it, right? There is another way of doing it, which if we've got time, I'll get into as well. So what we're going to quickly just do here is we're just going to add this. So all I've done there is just put a little bit of error handling in there. We don't want any of this bit inside this if to run if it hasn't got the IDs properly. So in other words, if any of those, sorry, that one needs to change to CDI. So if either of the two IDs have not been collected for some reason, then it won't run this. So neither of them can be nil for this to run. We're just going to make sure that obviously it does. Okay, so let's get rid of all this nonsense here. So there's our basic bit of code. So all we've literally done is just set up that show hide variable, got the two instruments that we're interested in. There might be more in there. Obviously, if you were doing more instruments, then it would be a longer list here, and you would have to have a few more visibles and whatnot in here for your instruments. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try and run our instrument, and you can see now I'm touching the button in the top left corner, and you can see the RPM gauge is there, and then I touch it and the VOR gauge is there. Touch it again, RPM, VOR. So you can get the idea of what you can do. You could do that for multiple instruments if you wanted to. So that, like I said, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, if we go back to the wiki very quickly, and you could not use visible there, you could use opacity if you wanted to, so you could make them, use a timer and make one fade out and the other one fade in. There's all sorts of things you could do. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the details of doing that. You can get creative with this. I'm just trying to show you the basics of how you do that within the panel scripting, but you can get as creative as you want to get, like you do with instruments in the panel script. But this is how you just implement that first basic panel script to get you going. So let's get our yeah. So let's go back to here and Z or Z order. So you can see a very similar structure to what we looked at before with the we're using the instrument get again this time, but instead of using the visible to turn the instrument on and off, we're just going to change the Z order to give them a different order. So we're going to steal that. We're going to, I think, I'm just going to edit all of that out. I'm not going to get rid of it. I should have copied that before I commented it out. Like I said, I'm just a bit ad hoc, ad-libbing, so to speak, but it's only going to be quite quick. Right, so we're going to use a Z order. Right, then the first one is on RPM ID, and the next one is on CDI ID. Okay, so this is a little different. Okay, so now we need to put the number of the Z order. So the lower the number, the further to the back it's going to be, and the higher the number, the further the front it's going to be. So you get the ID now. All we need to do is we need to basically say something like. There's probably a cleaner way of doing this, but I'm just going to do something like. Whoops. There is a cleaner way, but not going to make it too complicated. Okay, so we'll copy those two over again. Okay, so now we've got our two, then all we're going to do is just going to swap them over. So again, we're not running this code now, but we've kept the two same instruments. We use the same two instrument IDs, RPM and CDI, and we're going to use a Z order of them. So if show height, in other words, if it's true, you don't have to say equals true. These ifs, and the same as the visibles, they only have to equate to true. So you don't have to say if show height equals true. You can just say if show height. That basically means if it's true, you can write it out in full if it makes it easier to read the code for you. But you don't have to. So if show height is true, then make the Z order that. And if it's not, in other words, if it's false, make it the opposite. So make the RPM on top of that. So when we initially started the instrument, we said that it's going to be false. So this one is going to, this bottom one is going to activate first of all. So what do we want to be? We want the higher instrument to be the RPM, and that is correct. So again, if we run the instrument and we touch our button, oh, we've got the nav. Oh, I made a mistake there. Apologies. Why is that not working? Show hide is false. Okay. I'm probably overlooking something really easy here. It's getting late. I use this print here, peeps. It just tells me where the code is going. I'm pretty much sure it's going here. Oh, I know. I don't need that. I've just seen what the problem is. It's doing the opposite. I said we're starting with false. It was the same on the other one. I should have noticed that. We're starting with show height equals false, but the first thing we're doing is inverting it. So although we're starting with false, it actually turns it into true. So these need to be, that one as well needed to be, that one needed to be not show, and that one needed to be show. And then here, this one needed to be 4, and 3, and 3, and 4. Now there was another way I could have done that. I could have moved that show height equals not show height to after the if, so it does it when as you exit this rather than before. So there's multiple ways to skin a cat. So there we go. Oh, still not. Why is that? What have I missed this time? Maybe I should have put the well, let's do it, because I was going to show you. So I just put this in here so that when I run, move that up off there. I look in my console and I see apologies. It is getting late. None of this will run because I haven't touched the button, right? So none of this will run. I'm thinking it was a subscribe. None of this will run because I haven't touched the button at all. So all that will run, all what you will see on the screen is the order in which we created them. Let's go to our thing. The order that they're sitting here. So whichever one is on top, and the VOR is on top, so that's why the VOR is appearing on top. That one was saying you can't change the order here, so I could swap them over in the panel and then reload them in there, or I could change. So what I could do is at the beginning, this is what I said to you, you can change the order if you like, but when the panel runs, I can I can make the RPM on top. That's 4 and 3. Yeah. So now, when I run the panel, the RPM is on top, and when I touch the button, CDI appears. So that is the fundamentals, and there's my here appearing every time I touch the button there. So that is the fundamentals, or a couple of basic ways that you can manipulate instruments just using those UUIDs, and I showed you how to get those to manipulate the panels or the instruments within the panel script. And you can do whatever you want at this panel script. Like I said, you could add a hardware switch to toggle between those two switches. So when the switch is in the up position, it shows the RPM gauge, and when it's in the down position, it shows the VOR. Whatever we wanted to do, you could swipe. You could have the instruments move with a timer, move slowly in from the left, or sort of fade in and out. There's all sorts of things you could do if you really wanted to get creative. But I think a basic switching like that is the quickness. When you're flying, you tend to not want too many animations going on. But something that happens quite quickly, you flick a switch or you touch a button and then you get to see that. Or maybe you might only want it temporarily, in which case you might just want to just use the on press and on release of a button. So while you've got your finger on the touch screen or a physical button, that one particular instrument shows, and then when you let go of it, it drops back to its normal view because you only want to look at it quickly. There's all sorts of ways. It really depends on the instruments and what you want to achieve. Now, one of the last things that we need to do, now we've created a panel and we've got all our scripting work and we're happy with it, of course we can still keep editing through this process, is we need to get it back into our home tab, because at the moment that home tab panel that we created, let's close this panel, so we'll go back into the home tab. So this panel that we created earlier is literally just a collection of instruments. There is no panel scripting applied to this because this is just a dumb panel, if you like. What we need to do is, because we've now created that panel within Create Edit, we can comfortably just remove that panel. We don't need it anymore because we still have it now back in Create Edit. Okay. The simple way of getting it back into the panel is you just add it like you would a normal panel. And now when you add a normal panel, any panels that you have created in Create Edit will appear in this list. So you can see there it is, my panel. There's no preview because we didn't create one. That's probably the subject of another video, creating all the previews and the layout images and transparencies and whatnot. If there's interest in that, I suppose I could do a video about that too. But we'll select our panel, we'll click add. Again, there's no preview, but we'll click add again. And you can see there's our preview that we created. And when I click on it, there's all our instruments and they're in the same order because that's how they are in Create Edit. Now you see the power of Air Manager. If you had that as a CIF file, you would have had nothing in your Create Edit and you could have just imported that panel into there and then simply created a panel here and you're done. You're good to go. Now this one, because we imported it from Create Edit, it's got all this panel scripting that's in the Create Edit tab. And the beauty of this is that, just like with your instruments, when you do an edit here, if you do an edit, once you save it, if you got your panel already open, you just close it and then reopen it again, and you've collected that new script. Whatever edits you've made are now dragging. You don't have to keep doing this process. If you're just changing the script, you can keep tinkering with the script as long as you save it in Create Edit. If it's not open here, or if it is already open, you just close it and then reopen it again, and you will drag the new code into the panel script so you can check if that's working okay. So if we go ahead now just very quickly and run our panel, we're running on the wrong display. That's the one thing I didn't select. So we run the panel and there's our instrument, and if I touch the top right hand corner, there you go, there's our toggle between the RPM and the VOR, and then back to RPM, VOR, back to RPM. That is now a panel that you can use, and you can, because it exists in Create Edit, you can add some more to your panel scripting or change it around to your heart's content. It can be a continual work in progress if you need it to be. So that is panel scripting. I hope this has been useful for some. And if there's any subjects that we need to delve into a little bit more and we need a tutorial for, be sure to let me know down in the comments, and I'll do my best to cobble a tutorial together for whatever subject that may be. Thanks for watching again.